Good afternoon. I'm proud that you still have an attention span for day 37 of Capstones. That's what it feels like in my other life. Okay. Your inability to take a joke is duly noted, Mr. Dean. Okay, so this afternoon we'll hear from two of our seniors. First we'll hear from Dominic Melancon, who will defend the following thesis. The current environment greatly disables the Catholic formation of young people due to the disembodiment of community by social media. Mr. Melancon.
A soccer commentator in the United Kingdom once said, "Everyone is as brave as a lion behind the screens of their laptops or phones." With approximately 1.9 billion monthly Facebook users around the globe, social media has become an integral part of our lives and is unavoidable. For all the good that social media has created with social movements and access to large amounts of information, there is a side of this new technology that is destroying what it means to be human. The level of narcissism in our society is at an all-time high. Narcissism is defined as excessive or erotic interest in oneself and physical appearance. Merriam-Webster. Social media websites are no longer performing the envisioned function of creating a positive communication link among friends, family, and professionals. It is a veritable battleground where insults fly from the human quiver, damaging lives and destroying self-esteem and a person's sense of self-worth. Because I agree with Anthony Carmona, president of Trinidad and Tobago, I defend the current cultural environment greatly disables the Catholic formation of young people due to the disembodiment of community inspired by social media. To begin, I will define a few key terms. Catholic faith formation is a form of evangelization. Evangelization is a fundamental mission of the Church. It describes all the ways the Church, including clergy, religious, and the baptized faithful, teaches, celebrates, and witnesses to the gospel message with the aim of conforming hearts and minds to Jesus Christ. William Sadler from the Sadler School. A community can be defined as a unified body of individuals. Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Social media is a form of electronic communication, such as websites for social networking and microblogging, through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, or content such as videos. Merriam-Webster Dictionary. The beginning of social media's history to the younger demographic primarily began in 2004 with the creation of Facebook. In its early years, it was only available to college students to communicate with other students about their class schedules and other details of their student life. By June 2004, over 250,000 students across 34 different schools were active users. Only 6 months later, the website reached 1 million active users, and it became available to the public. Facebook has remained one of the most prevalent forms of social media to have ever existed. In 2016, the social media app TikTok became available to American citizens. The growth of the app is rather impressive, with 100 million users in its first years and over 3 billion downloads since launch. According to Statista.com, the United States has approximately 136 million active users. And according to the company itself, TikTok has 1.5 million active users a month. Through such communication, we seem to have lost a sense of identity with each other in exchange for advanced reach. We have traded personal communities with each other in exchange for the notifications on our screens. This trade has come at a cost that we as consumers have chosen subconsciously, and it has affected our lives in ways we are not always aware of. Pope Francis points out in his message that from an anthropological perspective, the metaphor of the net recalls another meaningful image, the community. In the positive sense, the Pope says, the community is one that thrives on mutual listening and dialogue. Unfortunately, the Pontiff observes that the social network communities are now automatically synonymous with community. Vatican News. As Catholics, we are responsible for being conscious of the media we invest in. As we invest our time and interest in increased exposure to social media, we begin to conform to thoughts of content you find on social media. For this reason, it is necessary to ensure that this content does not place strain on our relationship with friends, family, or even God. The net, observes the Pope, is an opportunity to promote encounter with others, but it can also increase our self-isolation, like a web that can entrap us. He notes that young people are the ones most exposed to the illusion that the social web can completely satisfy on a relational level. There is a dangerous phenomenon of young people becoming social hermits, who risk alienating themselves completely from society. This dramatic situation reveals a serious rupture in the relational fabric of society, one we cannot ignore, Vatican News. For any relationship of friends, it is not immediately noticeable how social media can affect or maybe even weaken our relationship. As Catholics, we believe that God is meant to be the center of any healthy relationship. As we affiliate ourselves with social media, we trade our time for something inefficient in the search for God. We begin to surrender the possibility of defending who we are through God, for the opportunity in engaging in a cycle of empty words and promises. The fruits of a relationship, with social media invited into it, no matter how much, are often only as fruitful or meaningful as the content of the media, which often has very little meaning due to its presentation. It is easy to say both good-hearted things and bad-hearted things when you are only made available to a screen and not the person. However, it is necessary to question what good comes out of sending a message from one screen to a friend that is not better received in the words of the presence of a friend. Perhaps it is harsh to abandon our phones. After all, they are seen as a necessary tool in our everyday life. But we ought to consider how we abandon our friends' needs through how we communicate with them. Perhaps it is harsh to commit what we wish to tell a friend to the screens of our phones, rather to being present them in their lives. Where must the line be drawn, if it is possible to have fruitful relationships through technology? If a friendship's communication heavily relies on technology, then communication must be recentered towards being present with the friend. A more personal and intimate bond is formed when a relationship grows through physical interaction. However, when a friendship grows through means of digital devices, the sincerity is left to the screens you see. We must be conscious of our attention to others, how it is given and how it is received. The more technology is integrated into our social lives, the more difficult to be conscious of the things we say. Even with the creation of cell phones, it was never considered that there would be apps that would serve to the younger demographic as a means of sharing vast amounts of content, such as apps like TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat. As technology progressed, so did the need to sell to consumers to ensure the product would be successful on a larger scale. As the newest generation becomes more involved in social media, we are likely to become separated from many societal views and practices, as has been seen in recent times. Now more than ever, our generation has been separated on ideology, morality, and many more things. Dr. Robert H. Schmerling, faculty at Harvard Medical School, writes that, while social media addiction may seem harmless, it can have serious consequences. Addiction to social media has been linked to a range of health issues, including depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. It can also lead to sleep deprivation, which can have a range of negative effects on our mental and physical health. In addition to its impact on mental health, social media addiction can also have a negative impact on productivity, as people spend increasing amounts of time scrolling through their feeds instead of getting work done. This separation has been partly due to the integration of technology into our personal lives and having allowed technology to spread towards our means of communication. This communication is no longer restricted to reason or rationality. There is no longer a right or wrong opinion. Only a standard of any desire you have, so long as it is not disagreed upon by others. Then you have to fight. This sort of dissolution among a large group of people intended to inherit and support future generations may be considered alarming. While many will perceive that technology has increased our ability to communicate in terms of efficiency, it has negatively impacted our ability to communicate meaningfully. Dr. Schmerling continues, one of the most significant impacts on media on mental health is the culture of comparison it creates. Social media is full of carefully curated images and stories that present an idealized version of people's lives. This idealized image can create a sense of inadequacy in people, leading to feelings of depression and anxiety. Such results go against the principle of recognizing that everyone, no matter the inadequacy or challenges, are made in the image and likeness of God. If our means of communication are only meant to advance as time goes on, then communication itself will distance us from each other. Unless technology finds a way to integrate meaningful conversations with the convenience that technology offers, then the future of technological communication will only create more dissolution among our generation, preventing the Catholic faith formation in our communities. Giving up social media could help you to reprioritize your relationship with God. In turning away from sin, we are called to seek virtue. Part of the problem with our social dependence on social media is that it blinds us from the virtue we should be seeking, humility. Despite all the challenges that Catholic media brings into our communities, I offer the following suggestions for restoring our focus to godly habits. One idea is to log out of Facebook and completely take that hard break. Researcher Morten Tromholt of Denmark found that after taking a 1-week break from Facebook, people had higher life satisfaction and positive emotions compared to people who stayed connected. We can also become more mindful and curious about how social media affects our minds and hearts, weighing the good and the bad. We should ask ourselves how social media makes us feel and behave, and decide whether we need to limit our exposure to social media altogether by logging out or deactivating our accounts, or simply modify our social media environment. We each have to come to our own individual decisions about social media use, based on our own personal experience. Grounding ourselves in the research helps us weigh the good and the bad and make those decisions. Online social interactions are no substitute for the real thing. And in-person, healthy relationships are vital to society and our own individual well-being. St. Augustine, doctor of the Catholic Church, is quoted as saying, "To many, total abstinence is easier than perfect moderation. Moderation is hard because we often overestimate our self-esteem, our self-control. Moderation can look different for everyone. Here are a few questions that you can help determine what moderation should look like for you. What does your social media or phone usage look like compared to your prayer life? And be willing to adjust accordingly. Do you spend most of your time on your screen after your daily responsibilities are done? What do you want your time to look like? Finally, search and embrace faith-filled content, and ditch accounts that lead you to sin, such as any accounts that lead you to judge or envy others. Screen time and social media are in our lives, and they influence our lives, so we must be vigilant and adjust accordingly to restore and preserve our Catholic cultural community. Thank you."
Thanks, Dominic. Are there any faculty questions?
Mr. Fay.
Thanks, Dominic, for that presentation. I enjoy your contrast, your image there of the screen time versus the time spent in prayer. I think that's kind of a common analogy that we hear, or that we've heard a few times, at least in the Capstone series, and that's good. I'm wondering about the middle ground between the two, something that I described as the middle ground between prayer and a low good, that is the intellectual life. Could you talk about how this technology, has maybe affected our cultural intellectual life?
Right, thank you for your question. So social media itself, or increased exposure to social media, definitely has impacted the sort of intellectual being in humans. For one, as I mentioned in my presentation, that rationality and reason are no longer a part of modern day conversations that we have between topics. So it's not completely evident how this exposure to social media has decreased this sense of awareness in our intellectual life. But it certainly has been able to subconsciously subject us to debates and arguments that don't have as much meaning. When they're held on this social platform, there's not a point that's getting across. Much more there is, rather, I guess you can imagine, an agenda that is being pushed.
Thanks, and just because I'm curious, what's an example from your perspective of a debate or an argument that happens on social media that actually doesn't matter, or that doesn't really carry any significance? Just one example.
Well, one example of debates that happen on social media, I wouldn't say that there are any arguments that don't entirely matter within and of themselves on social media. Rather, when brought down to a scale of personal interaction, perhaps there's a much more conveying message that can be reached. That's the answer I have for you.
Okay, thanks. I was thinking about the pineapple on pizza today, so.
It doesn't belong on pizza. Mr. Alvarado.
Thank you, Dominic, and thanks for waiting so patiently for me to get up here. Pineapple. Come on, man. No, my question is about our technology policies for campus. So, like you, we kind of think communication not mediated by technology is a big deal. And so we try to provide a sacred space by not permitting technology use to interfere with socialization that might happen on campus. But as we all see, not all students take that very seriously. So what encouragement could you give your classmates to preserve and protect this campus being a sacred space for real communication?
Thank you for your question. So the school itself, I would say, in my own opinion, has some very good policies in terms of technological control. For example, the cubbies in the front office for phones. But what I tend to notice is that immediately as the day ends, everyone's running towards the front office and then no one can move. So it's definitely, there's only so much that the school can do to limit what our students will do with phones. So it's very important for the school to address to the students what your sort of behavior is looking like with your phone. So if I were to give any advice, first of all, be conscious that once you leave the chapel, there's far more going on your phone. You've just went through a whole day of school. I promise you there's more to think about than TikTok, if that's what you're doing. Please don't do it.
But also definitely not on campus, because the technology policy means that you don't use your smartphone on campus.
Right.
So what encouragement would you have for those who might be tempted after school to use it, as far as helping keep this a space where there isn't a risk of someone disconnecting because they're looking at the black mirror?
Thank you. As far as encouragement goes, I would recommend, first of all, if you're going to talk to anyone, talk to the friends that you've just had a day of school with. Talk about what happened in class, the shortcomings that you may have had, what you are proud about class, and embrace the day that you've had, not only here on campus with your friends, but here on campus, because there's so many opportunities to do, but with the Lord. Our Adoration Chapel 24/7 is something I've always appreciated with. So rather than going straight to your phones and maybe disconnecting from a conversation, embrace in a more meaningful conversation with the community we have here.
Thank you, Dominic.
Mr. Anson.
Thanks, Dominic. Our patron, John Paul II, was heavily involved in the fall of communism, and with then President Ronald Reagan, with basically establishing a Catholic idea about work. People described it as a theology of work. In his encyclical Laborem Exercens, for example, there was all this writing about how Catholics should understand the idea of work. Theologians today have suggested that we need a similar development along the lines of communication. And so my question is this: what role do you think the church could play in crafting a theology of communication?
Thank you for your question. as far as the church's role in our personal lives and how we interact with social media, I think something like that really boils down to the level of a parish life. And I would feel that it's very important to embrace the sort of parish life that you have. So perhaps if the bishop for a diocese believe it would be necessary or proper that there should be more community involved and more community interaction involved, perhaps weekly. So for example, adoration hours that are hosted for the entire parish.
So you'd see adoration as like communication with the divine as maybe like a way in which that could be made clear that it's an important thing we need to incorporate as Catholics.
Yes, adoration as a way of unifying each other for centering ourselves towards God rather than whatever you conversate about on your phone.
Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Dominic. Many parishes today utilize social media to communicate with their parishioners, and often also as a tool for potential evangelization. I'm curious, what advice would you give to pastors or parishes in terms of how they could well use or shouldn't use social media?
Right, thank you for your question. So social media has definitely been a great opportunity for parishes to reach out to their parishioners. And it definitely does have capabilities in terms of evangelization. However, the prioritization has to be in-person communication with the priest. Because when you think about the coming together for the Mass, we are prioritizing being there in order to recognize the sacrifice of God. And in a sense, the unity that we are creating through the Mass, that unity needs to be preserved and kept intact whenever we come together to meet. So if priests or bishops feel as though they can respectfully and safely, in the sense that they don't lead people into sin through perhaps any ways of coming into social media. For example, if someone has trouble with social media, but their parish often posts on it in ways to let them know. So if priests and parishioners, priests and bishops can do that respectfully and safely to not bring them, then I think it definitely should happen.
Any senior questions?
Miguel.
So you talked about the negative effects of social media, like for example, for our minds and our hearts. And so I'm wondering if you could expound on that topic a little bit more, on the negative effects of social media and with our phones.
Thank you. So as far as what social media does to us, specifically in our minds, it's, as I said, it's not always something that we are aware of. However, the cycle, in a way, and by cycle, of course, I would refer mostly to something along the lines of like a dopamine run, in the sense, whenever you open your phone and open social media, it's not just as far as opening the app, but in a sense, the way dopamine itself works, it's not just a matter of feeling happy, it's a neurological affirmation for something that we are interested in. And it sort of implants this idea of investment in that topic. So whenever, it's not just so much as opening the app, but rather picking up your phone and seeing a notification. So as far as the effect that social media has on our minds, it's definitely, as I stated with Mr. Fay, it's definitely, in a sense, dulled down our intellectual processing and our ability to intellectually, I'm sorry, it's a very good question. So in the intellectual life, in a sense, if I have to reword this, social media plays the role of prioritizing time and effort. There is effort in the sense whenever you are on social media. You prioritize that time and effort with people that you aren't immediately present to. And that can really play a dangerous role in an individual's life whenever they can't prioritize time with people who are around them and people who are dependent upon them. And as far as the problems that social media prevents in our hearts and in our souls, well, the unity that you might think of whenever you are on social media and you're contacting others, it's not one-to-one when you think about the unity of the mass or the unity of our school life here. That unity is only made available to the screen that you're in front of. There's no intent that I could have, or, there's no sort of joy I could wish to you that I could really display to you by sending you a video on an app or texting you, right? So in person, the means of unity through our communication is far more interlinked because as humans, we are body and soul. So phones and social media themselves sort of take away the soul of that interaction and leaves the body.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic.